Yesterday, we spoke about the credit repair process and how flawed the whole thing is. Today, I've got testimony from lawsuits to back it up. And if you haven't figured it out already, there's a huge conflict of interest that we're going to talk about. And I found a section from the Bennett testimony that clearly explains the issue with investigations. Now, when the creditor receives the dispute from the bureaus via eOscar, they check their records for a matching account. If they find it, the item gets verified. Now, of course they're going to find it because the incorrect reporting originated from their records in the first place, right? The Bennett testimony said it this way. Nearly every major furnisher who has been deposed has confessed to a policy of automated investigations in which the consumer has almost no hope of obtaining relief. The furnishers merely proofread the form from the CRA and match it to the data within their computer's account screen. There's no other means by which to verify and correct a credit reporting dispute once the error has worked its way into the furnisher's computer account record. None of the major furnishers of which I'm aware reviews original documents or paper records. Now, even if the creditors aren't automating the process entirely, the term investigation is probably a little generous. Here's another sample from the Bennett testimony. In pretrial depositions and in evidence at trial, MBNA admitted that its sole procedure for handling consumer disputes under the FCRA was to compare the CRA data to its own summary of the account in its computer that itself was the subject of the consumer's dispute. MBNA's 12 investigators were expected to perform an average of 250 investigations per 8-hour day. They were never to consult original documents and were not provided any means by which to determine if the account summary within their computer was in fact accurate. Now, if you think that your additional docs get reviewed, they most definitely don't. The FCRA says that the furnisher should receive the notice of dispute and that the notice shall include all relevant information regarding the dispute that the agency has received from the consumer or reseller. Now, notice the words all relevant information. Referring once again to the 2003 Senate testimony, we find this. Worse still, the codes used by both the CRAs and their subscribers, the furnishers, are limited in number and rarely describe the actual basis for the consumer's dispute. For example, in two of my recent cases, both identical, consumers Van Evans and Ray Bailey wrote dispute letters to all three bureaus. The disputes were conveyed in great detail and explained that consumers were not responsible for the disputed accounts and that any signatures claimed to be theirs were forgeries. Each consumer dispute letter also enclosed copies of handwriting examples such as signatures on driver's license, military IDs, and other credit cards. Van Evans had also obtained a copy of the forged note and included it in his dispute letter. When Equifax and TransUnion received the letters, their employees simplified the dispute to a code and described not his or hers. This was all the furnishers received. So the eOscar system does not include the ability to forward relevant dispute-related documentation to the creditors. As you're probably aware, it is common for consumer disputes to contain documentation and supporting evidence. Now, is it really possible that all supporting evidence, documentation, and valuable reasoning can be translated via a single numerical code? The answer, hello, is no. Yet, no matter how complex the dispute and documentation are, they will be reduced to a single numerical code. Here's another snippet from the Bennett testimony. No matter how detailed the written dispute, the CRA will merely translate it into a two-digit code and usually by automated means, ACDV, send a message to the furnisher identifying the code its employees believes best describes the dispute. The employees of all three CRAs operate under a quota system whereby each employee is expected to process all of the disputes of an individual consumer in less than 4 minutes. Now, there are a total of 26 numerical codes describing 26 categories of disputes that can be used. And according to sources, as much as 40% of all disputes, regardless of content, get categorized as generic catch all categories. A minority of generic dispute codes end up being used on a majority of disputes. Now, if you have a pulse at all, you may be experiencing elevated blood pressure now. This should bother you. If it doesn't, please get yourself checked. What's the problem? The problem is that laws are being bent at the consumer's expense. The problem is that these are serious issues that will affect you as a consumer or a credit repair professional, and how you handle your job. Now, on the bright side, this may give consumers some legal loopholes to work with. If the Bureau isn't communicating the complete dispute to the creditor, are they really meeting the requirements of the law? As you may have realized by now, there is somewhat of a conflict of interest, and we have spoken about this before, for the bureaus, and that they are largely responsible for the accuracy of data, but they profit considerably from inaccurate data. And in case you're keeping track, we'll outline the main points of this conflict of interest here. Number one, the credit bureaus are in the data business. Subprime data, in other words, bad credit, is the most profitable data for the bureaus to own and sell. Number two, more accurate data would probably mean less data, since the partial matches feature of the matching algorithm would have to be trimmed down. Less data would hurt their business because they are in the business of collecting and selling data. Number three, more accurate data would mean less concern about ID theft, less paranoid consumers, and less revenue generated from selling credit reports and identity theft related services to paranoid consumers. 4. Stricter reporting requirements would result in less data being reported, fewer errors on credit reports, and ultimately less revenue for the bureaus from selling subprime data and identity theft related services. It would also make life more difficult for creditors, the bureau's main customers. 5. The bureau's main customers are creditors. It is in their best interest as businesses to serve the interest of their main consumers, which coincidentally aren't always in the best interest of the consumers. 6. Since most people don't take the time to follow up and force the issue with the bureaus, it is often more profitable for them to ignore disputes than it is to resolve them. 7. Through eOscar and dispute automation, consumer disputes of incorrectly reported items are closer to becoming an additional profit center. Now, while it's hard to gauge and pinpoint down corporate intent precisely, one fact is apparent from this list. There's a lot of potential reasons why the credit bureaus aren't particularly motivated when it comes to the accuracy of consumer data. Now, with Capital One, for example, they admitted in 2003 congressional testimony that they withhold the credit limit field on their credit cards, causing the high limit credit, in most cases, to default to whatever the consumer's highest balance has been. Capital One isn't the only company that has done this. Many other creditors have done the same thing. Now, the result of this activity is that for many consumers, it appears as though the credit line is maxed out and keeps the consumer's credit file less attractive to the competition. Credit card companies, including Capital One, are also notorious for issuing several credit cards with smaller limits, so consumers are more likely to bump up against their limits. And since the credit limits are withheld in credit reporting, the impact on a consumer's credit report is even worse. So, with all of that being said, as you can see, unless you know the process, you cannot leverage this information against the bureaus. I'm sure you have a lot to think about, so let's talk about this more later. If you do need help with your credit report and want to find out if it would be a good fit for me to do a credit sweep for you, you can find the link in description, and I hope you have a great one and get to disputing.